All right, we are going to start Unit 4. I guess before we there's two things I wanted to mention. Um, Angie has heard at least one of these, but Keegan, you have not. Now, I have no idea with what I'm about to tell you, and if I tell you this and you laugh or whatever and say no, no thanks, it's totally fine, okay? Rankin offers a 4-year bachelor's degree in management information systems. All right. Do you have any desire at all to hear anything about that? It's MIS. I mean, and it is IT related. All the courses are 8 weeks long, and the whole thing can be done online. Now, I told Angie about this was one day when you weren't here, and she said she'd at least be interested in hearing about it. See, it has 4 tracks: general management, entrepreneurship, MIS, and fleet management. All right. But this gentleman here is the guy who's in charge of recruiting. I think he's out of St. Louis. Now, Angie said she would have an interest in at least hearing about it. So what I was going to do was get back to this guy. His name is Ian Bevel. I was going to get back to Mr. Bevel, and ask him to come in. Just tell him there's 2 people, but if you're interested in coming in, you can come in any day, basically, as long as you give me at least a day's notice. I didn't want him coming in on a day we have a test or something, but other than that, it's not any kind of problem. The other thing, so I'm going to put that out there anyway. So if you're interested, fine. And if you're not, it's also fine. But the other thing, where is that? Of course, I got rid of it. Dang it. See if I still have this. Okay, Rankin Connection puts out this stuff. If you have not already gone out to Rankin and try to find the Rankin Connection, and if you, I don't know, have you done that? Have you done that? So you have. What it'll do is it'll put your name in a database, and then as jobs become available, they'll send them to you. Okay, and it's also set up that right now too, that if you do that, and of course I'd remove the message, but so you'll get things like this, and I mean, sometimes you can ferret out through them, when you view the details, etc. You can say you only want ones that are IT related, okay? But you can also submit your resume out there. So if you're interested, basically they can put it out there right away. So like I said, just go out and go to Rankin's website and search for Rankin Connection. All right, that said, yeah, that was 3 minutes. But now we're going to start Section 4 right now. Section 4 starts on page 117 and it ends on page, I believe it's 209. So in other words, it is about 92 or 93 pages long. Definitely the longest section we've had in the book so far, and maybe the longest one in the entire book, period. The hope is today we will go over the first approximately 35 pages. That is 4.1. Now, some of the stuff that's in here will be new. Some of the stuff in here will be review. Some of the stuff in here you'll probably never want to use. All right. For instance, when they start talking about using gestures and stuff like that, you might think I have no idea what that means. Even after listening to it, I wouldn't want to put that in my, on the project I'm doing, etc., which is fine. I'm going through everything that's in here though, for completeness sake. So as it says, in this chapter, they're going to cover everything: buttons, menus, keyboards, text entry fields, using the microphone. All right. So as it says, you will learn how to design an app's user interaction. Well, we have been doing that. We have been. Now, you may or may not agree with this, but one thing about with what we've been working on so far, have our apps been totally intuitive? I don't know. All right. But tomorrow, the plan is for the first part of the class, like I said, we're going to rebuild that calculator program. All right. We're going to put a spinner in there. And then what we'll do on Monday is we'll take that program and we'll add a menu to it. Now, what I don't want to do for the next week is do a lot of lecturing. So the hope is that I'm going to go over 4.1 today. And then tomorrow I'm going to go over that example, the calculator with the spinner. Boom. Hopefully that takes about an hour or so. The rest of the period will be lab. Monday, we'll add a menu to that. The rest of the period will be lab. All makes sense? Tuesday, we'll go over 4.2. Wednesday, we'll go over 4.3. Thursday and Friday, even though it's only about 10 pages, we'll go over 4.4. Now, I've looked at the next test that Mr. Smith has, and it's an interesting test in that the hallmark of what's on the test is not explained very well in here. So either I'm going to do some rewriting or I'm going to use a different test. All right. And I don't know yet exactly what I'm going to do. All right. So you should make sure your app is intuitive. In other words, the app should perform as your users expect it to perform, and they give the examples they give are kind of stupid, but it's fine. So as it says, this chapter introduces the Android input controls. You can use a wide variety. So really, as far as what's in there, you know what buttons are. All right. You know what an edit text is. None of that stuff is new. But if we look through here, look. So number 3, a seek bar. All right. So let's suppose, for example, you were setting that up so that people could like gauge how experienced they are. Let's say you were asking somebody, how experienced are you in HTML? And they could grab that seek bar and they could drag it one way or the other. That's just the first thing that came to mind. But you get what I'm talking about? All right. Number 4, these are checkboxes. Those shouldn't be anything new. You've created checkboxes before. All right, but not in this language. Number 5, radio buttons. You've created radio buttons before, but not in this language. 6, this is called a toggle. And as you can see, it can be turned on or off. That's all it is. And number 7 is the one we're going to concentrate more on because that's the spinner. Now we call that typically a drop-down list, all right, in the stuff that we're working in. All right. So it says if you want a better description of each one, you can click there. I'm not going to do that because that's going to bring you to developer.android.com. And if you got any questions about any of them. All right. Input controls and view focus. Well, the good news is you already know how to set the focus by using request focus. All right. Some controls can naturally get the focus. Some controls cannot get the focus. Technically, you can't request the focus for a text view because a text view is the equivalent of a label. All right. So it's not like you can request that the focus be put there. Does that make sense? All right. So as it says, focus indicates which view is currently selected to receive input. And it can be initiated by touching, all right, or by clicking. Everything we've been doing basically has been by clicking. One thing I would like to do tomorrow is, and they're in the office, but I'd like to bring back the 2 tablets. And after we get that program hopefully up and running, I'd like you to see, both of you to see if you can get it running on your tablets. All right, just so you've got some experience doing that. All right, then what we'll do, just so you know, is, like I said, on Monday, we'll add a menu to that. I don't know how long that's going to take because I haven't written that part yet. I've got the calculator written and I've got the spinner and stuff. It all works, but I didn't write the menu. So I'll do that this weekend. If it doesn't take too long, and my hope is we're talking maybe a half an hour. I could be wrong. But then what I'd like to do is I'd like to go and show you the steps for I'll take my copy and put it out in the Google Play Store. All right, so you can see how that is done. Again, one of the things that you are supposed to be doing for your final project is to take your final project and actually submit it out to the Google Play Store. All right, and again, I've told you this before, it's a one-time $25 charge. You can put any app you want out there then for the rest of your life. All right. Okay. Another app, it says attribute of these input controls is they're clickable. All right, meaning they can react to events. Now, the only thing that we've been reacting to thus far has been buttons. All right, but when you think about it, going back and looking at these, You know, for example, let's suppose, and this tell you real quick, I've decided, and it's going to be interesting, the the homework in the C# class, tomorrow we're going over chapters 9, 10, and 11. We're finishing up section 2. There's no homework for 9 that they've got out there. There's no homework for 11 that they've got out there. The homework for 10 that they've got out there supposes you already know how to use classes. Well, that's not till chapter 12. So what I'm going to do with them, and I'm going to tape this, so if you're interested and you ever want to watch it, you can. If you don't, fine. We're going to literally build a payroll application as a class. We're going to make a splash screen. We're going to have radio buttons where you're going to ask the kind of employee you've got, and then it's going to go to a different form based on one of 4 different employee types. Then what I'd like to do before the break is get that to work and then save that, be able to save all that information for each kind of employee to a regular file. That's it, just to a file. Then, do that within the next 2 weeks. And then spend the rest of the time until the break putting all those things into their own class. All right? And if you remember classes from last year, because we had some goods and some bads we did with classes. And then when we come back from the break, basically what I want to do is turn that into a turnkey type of thing. It's only going to be for the employees. All right? I think I tried to do too much with you guys last semester, so it's just going to be an employee database. So we're going to literally create a database. And they're going to be able to add, modify, and delete employees based on those screens, but they'll be grabbing the information and retrieving it from a database and storing it to a database. I think if I've done that, I've done my job. At least I'm hoping that's what they think. All right. As it says, Android device input methods are becoming quite diverse, and that's true. All right. In fact, what was it? Somebody had told me, my brother, I think, was talking to me about that just bought a new refrigerator, and it was compatible with his phone. And he said it was kind of cool doing some of that kind of stuff. Maybe you've seen some of those commercials. There's that one commercial on TV where the sink is smart, and the dog comes up there and barks and stuff and whatever. But again, the point is, as time goes on, it's going to become more and more this kind of world. Now, I'm going to go off on my high horse for a second here. So if I tick off either one of you, sorry in advance. But to me, the hallmark of this is, as time is going on, people are getting more and more lazy. They want computers to do everything for them. It used to be, I had to get up and turn a channel, and people laugh at that kind of stuff now. I used to have to pick up a phone. It was literally stationary inside of a house, pick it up and get dial tone to do something. All right. Okay. So it says when a user is navigating through your user interface with an input device, it is necessary to make it clear which view has the focus and explicitly set the focus in your code to provide a path. You want to make it almost impossible for the user to screw up what you're asking them to do. Now, that said, can they still screw it up? They're human beings. All right? We all screw up. Some people screw up on purpose just to see what'll happen. Some people screw up just to see if they can get away with it. And some people screw up accidentally. I used to work with a guy, in Jim, no joke, at Blackhawk. And I always asked him, I said, Jim, how do you do this? I mean, you're like, pardon my French, but you're pissing off everybody all the time. He said, what I like to do is I like to see just how far I can go before something happens. And then I try to go just a little bit farther. And that's what he did. And the guy had been there for 25 years, so they weren't going to fire him. Okay. It says, in most cases, you don't need to control the focus yourself. Focus movement on a screen, it finds the nearest neighbor in the nearest direction. So again, as it says, if you set an edit view to a single line, the user can tap the return key and it'll close the keyboard. If you haven't noticed that yet, again, you can either, when you're doing this stuff, you can either use the regular keyboard on your computer or you can use the keyboard that's in there. Well, eventually we're going to try to set it up so you can't use the keyboard's computer on your computer. Because if people are going to use your Android app on their phone, they don't have that. All right, so you want to set it up like that. All right. So it says if the algorithm does not give you what you want, yeah, there are so many events. Just like there's all these events that we had in C#, there's events in here too. Next focus, up, down, left, right, etc. All right. So they give you an example in here and it says add one of these attributes to decide where to go upon leaving the view. All this is meant to be is just like a learning tool. All right. What I've been doing for the last 3 weeks, and I've got about 15 lectures done so far, all right, is I've been going in and what I'm doing is, let's just put all the cards out on the table. Ms. Kincaid thought that none of the websites were exactly what she was looking for. She liked all of them. She liked bits and pieces of all of them, but there were things that all of them didn't have. Now, so she said, you know, so what's happening? Well, I don't want to wait until fall to give her something and give them a new group. I don't want you to have to work on it, and I don't want these people in their class, so I told her I'd do it myself. And she's like, you don't have to do that. Let's just forget. No, we're not going to forget about it. I told her we're going to do it, and we're going to do it. All right. So what I have been doing is I have been doing a set of videos based on creating that website and interspersing that with the book. So why am I telling you that? Because I'm trying to make it totally example oriented. So I'm telling people, hey, if nothing else, like when you're learning HTML, just create an HTML file. Start putting stuff in it and see what happens. When you learn CSS, add CSS to your HTML file to see what happens. And the same thing in here. So if you're not sure how to use something, if you decide on the next homework, you know what? I don't really like these constraint layouts we've been working with, and I'd rather use a linear layout. Well, I'm not going to teach you how to use a linear layout. But if you want to go out to developer.android.com or watch, because there's umpteen different videos on using a linear layout, then do that. That's totally fine. All right. You don't get any more points for doing it. You don't lose any points for not doing it. All right. You can explicitly set the focus or find out where it's from using these methods. I'm not going to read those. The only one that we've worked with has been request focus. Now, one thing we could have used is this on focus changed. Because what we could do is remember how we've been checking and we've been using try catch, and if you leave it blank, all right, one thing we could be doing is we could check in the on focus changed. So we could set it up so when the program starts, you're in your edit text. Once you leave the edit text, you know, what's going to happen is it's going to fire an on focus changed event. Does that make sense? We could check, and if what was in that original edit text was either blank or whatever, we could just throw you right back there. Give you a toast, or just throw you back there, period. That's a little confusing for the end user. If they do something wrong, they just keep sending them back to the field where they did something wrong. You should at least give them a toast to let them know that they did something wrong, and a little message to show them what they did. All right. So next, buttons. Now, one thing about buttons, we've been using the default button, so we haven't been doing anything special with buttons. They're going to show you in here, all right, different types of buttons. Now, one thing that we're going to be using in the next program, I think we've done this before, is an image button. All right, but you can take an image and add it to a regular button if you want to do that. All right, and they talk about how to do that in here. So you can take a regular button and you can either have it have text, have it have an image, or an image with text. And they expect that if you're going to have it be an image with text, that the image is on the left. And they go through the whole process in here with this. Okay, I'm not going to do that because we're just using the default buttons. If you decide, you know what, I'd really rather use some customized buttons, just go look it up. All right. So it says Android offers several kinds of buttons, including raised buttons and flat buttons. They have 3 states, those being normal, disabled, and pressed. Now, when you look at these on the bottom, they really, in my opinion, they don't look like buttons. All right. But have you ever used a form where they've got, like at the bottom, it says, I agree, the type of thing, and it doesn't really look like a button? All right. It may look like a button, but a lot of times it doesn't. That's the ones that they're showing here, the flat buttons right here. We've been using, I believe at least, the raised ones. All right. So there's nothing special you have to do in order to be able to use those. I'm expecting that by now you understand what wrap content means. All right. I'm assuming you understand what match parent means. If I create a button and all I have on my screen is that button, and I set the width and the height to match parent, not wrap content, but match, it's going to be as big as my screen is. Typically you wouldn't do that. All right. But the reason I'm telling you that is when we get to recycler views, we're almost going to do that because that's going to take up the majority of our screen. All right. If, on the other hand, if you use wrap content, it says have it use as much room as you need it. And if you remember, I told you the other day when we looked at the test for the array operations, I manually went in and set the width and the height for each button to about 100 by 100 or whatever it was, just so they were the same size. So that's at least 3 ways that you can do that. All right? Okay. So they talk about the states of a button. That's a button's normal state. Okay, that's the way it looks. You can disable a button. There's a set enabled property that you can set to false. And it looks grayed out. It's not a visible property. It's an enabled property. So, you know, that's one of the things that I had talked to you about, like with the guessing game program, was not making something available until you had done something else. Sometimes people do it this way. All right. Or, you know, I showed you the other way too, when if you click the totals and you didn't have any totals yet, all it showed was basically your splash screen image type of thing. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. The press state, as it says, indicates the button is being touched or clicked. All right. So creating it with text, we don't have to go over this. I think you all get this. Setting the size and setting the text. By now you're familiar enough with using the strings.xml file. So there's nothing new in there. Now, if you decide you want to use an icon with that, this is what they talk about next in here. So as it says, to choose images, one thing about this that you may or may not be aware of. As you go through this, there's actually 2 ways that you can set up these images. One is, I've kind of showed it to you already. You go in there and you basically go through the drop down, etc., and you choose image asset. But there's also SVG, scalable vector graphics. Typically, the quality is going to be a little better on SVG if you do it that way. All right, but we've actually done stuff like this, and what you're going to see, not right now, but what you're going to see next week, if we have the time and hopefully can go and try to put this calculator thing out onto Google Play Store, is how this is used. For example, so this is extra high density pixels, extra high, and medium. What does that mean? The bigger the size, the more X's you put in there. The smaller the size, the less X's that you put in there, okay? And notice they've used clip art here. Why? Because that's just a clip art for the Android logo. So that's what you get by default. Though it's a really, really, really strong recommendation that if you're going to put something out on the screen, don't ever use that. All right? I mean, it's not that if you use that icon, it's not that they're not going to publish it and put it on the Play Store, but it looks kind of amateurish to people who come out there and look. So I mean, like with yours, if it's a restaurant thing, you probably want something that's restaurant oriented, as an example, okay? I don't know, Keegan, if you've come up with an idea yet, but one of the things that we're going to talk about on the homework today, and I mentioned this to you before, I've rewritten it and I've got the handout here for you, is this currency converter app. Now, if you decided you wanted to do something like that for your project, you could do it. Guess what? There's hundreds of them out there already. So you'd be doing your own, all right? When I had them do it last year, I had them do 8 different currencies. You know, after a while, it's just too much. So I cut it in half. And you're going to do 4 different currencies. The point is, if I'm doing a currency converter, it would be nice for this image to be a currency converter or something that says conversion or whatever, all right? And then you'll have it in the different sizes. Okay. So if you want to go through that and put stuff, these are the things that you get by default on your buttons. So these are the ones that are available to you. Can you use your own? Yes. All right. But typically you'll use one from the list that's in here. Okay. And they go through those steps. I'm not going to say any more about it. So this is the one they have you create. And I would say that if you're interested in possibly adding an image, then just go through the exercise here. I'm not trying to keep anything from you. All right? I'm just saying, I don't know if it's necessary that you do that or not do that. All right. So then so that's one with the icon followed by the text. Then they do just the icon. All right. And they don't do just the text because we've already done that. All right. So here's an example. Those are those flat buttons right there. All right. They basically blend right into the background is what they're saying. All right. It's a text only button that appears flat on a screen without any kind of shadow. The major benefit is simplicity. They minimize distraction from content. All right. And you could make a case, especially considering the fact that unless you go in and change the color of the button, they're purple now. You know, and that's kind of, yeah. I wouldn't have picked that color myself, but that's the color they picked. All right. So they go through the same stuff on how to create a flat button, designing images for buttons, etc. So again, if you can't find an image, you can go out and look for one. But, you know, the same kind of rules exist here that exist for, you know, back when we were talking about doing this in HTML. You know, you don't sit there and say, oh, wow, cool image. Go out to somebody else's website and start stealing their images. Don't do that. All right. But you should be able to go out to unsplash.com, pexels.com. Usually you're even okay with Google Images. All right. I put one out there. I actually made my own, and it's not very good, but it was just textual anyway, so it looked all right. Okay. Now, designing a floating action button. Now, what I want you to understand, because they're gonna repeat it, so much text in here in this section that doesn't have to be put in here. Did you hear what I said? All right. This is it right here. That's a floating action button. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to close this. I'm going to create a new project. And if you look right here, notice basic activity. See what it has? That's a fab. So I'm going to say next, and I'm going to call it fab app. All right, I'm not going to keep it anyway, but it's right there, and I'm going to click finish. Now, when I come over here, it's all loading. But when it gets done and it brings up in here my XML file, you're going to see it looks very similar to what we've already been doing, except it's going to have that floating action button on it. The reason that I'm taking the time to go through this with you and to tell you this, let me go to layout. Look what it made. Activity main, content main, fragment first, fragment second. Well, I'm going to go out here. And you can see what's in here now. All right. But the thing is, when I click right here, well, it's got fab on here. When I go here to content main, look at the difference. It's part of it. All right. So it's kind of being built, for lack of better words, in stages, for lack of better words. And we'll talk about fragments later, but that's how they build it. And when you go back to the regular activity main, there it is. The reason I'm telling you this is there must be a dozen times in the rest of this section that they'll say, now, if you made your thing as a basic activity, you can skip this. But if you didn't and you have to manually add it, so that's what they keep showing. Does that make sense to both of you? So what I'm saying is, hey, if you want a floating action button like that, then create a basic activity and don't create an empty activity. All right? Because that's going to save a lot of the time that we have going through this stuff. So as it says, you should use the fab or floating action button only to represent a primary action for a screen. As it says, for example, if you're trying to add contacts, clicking on this should allow you to add a new contact. It should be intuitive. It doesn't have to be on the bottom of the page like that. Kind of historically, it seems like it is there. I know that on my phone, for example, that if I go out here on my phone and I look, There's a fab, right? Makes sense? Now, does that mean that I think you should put one on your project? It depends on what you're doing for your project. You know what I'm saying? So whatever you think. And not only that, for example, for yours, with that restaurant thing, you might not want it on the front page. But on an inside page, you might want to let the user add a category, or you might want to let the user add a restaurant, or I don't know enough about it, but you understand what I'm saying. So you can go and you can, to my knowledge, you can go and make a basic activity inside of your application. There should be no reason you can't sit and combine these things and use different types. All right. Now it says, if you want to use the fab in your Android Studio project, you must add this statement to your build Gradle file. Well, let's look. So this is compile. See that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to go into Gradle scripts. I'm going to find my module one, which is the only one that we ever look at. All right. And let's see, what was that again? Oops. Let's copy that. My guess is it won't even show it in here. No, 0 results. So compile. I don't think we have to add it, is what I'm getting to. I think if you do it this way, if we put it in from the get-go, we don't have to add that. All right, I think that would be extraneous to add that. I would recommend not adding that. You'll know real fast whether or not it works. All right, I didn't go back and redo a lot of stuff with this. So floating action buttons by default are 56 by 56. As it says, it's best to use the default size unless you need something smaller. All right, so in other words, don't make it bigger than that. All right. Use an event listener called onClickListener. Well, guess what? That's one of the reasons I introduced that onClickListener to you. All right, as opposed to just putting it in the onClick event. Okay. All right, so adding the onClick, so they show you how to do it here. And remember, when you do it like this, and you either add it in your XML, either in design mode or in code mode, all right, after you do that, then you have to manually add this, and it has to be outside of the onCreate method, all right? And it needs view, and it doesn't have to be called view, but it's either view or view v is typically what people call it. All right. As it says, you can also handle the click programmatically using the button listener designer pattern. Well, you already know how to do this. Okay. Now, you may please read through this, not this second, but please read through this. And it's pretty much what I've been telling you. All right. When you call set onClick listener, you're doing what's called registering that listener. You're making that listener available to the program. All right. Says you must define the onClick method it must be public. Now, one thing I found is it doesn't have to return void. If you remember those things that I was doing yesterday in the array operations, I was returning a double. So I returned like the largest or the smallest or whatever. It's recommended that you return void. All right. But I called routines that didn't do that. That's what I'm saying. All right. So again, you can do this in a lot of different ways. So if you look here, create a method to do something in response to the button clicks, such as perform an action. So what I'm saying is, I'm hoping that you can look at this and understand that there's two ways of doing it. Either with a set onClick listener or by doing it with onClick. All right. And if you said, well, which one should I use? Well, I already told you. I don't know if you used on yours, you said you got your back button to work. All right. Did you use set onClick listener or did you use just the onClick? And it worked. See, and so if it works either way, then use the one that makes the most sense to you. All right. You know, again, I've said this before, and for some reason when I talk like this, people seem to think I'm trying to be funny. I'm not. There's no Android police. You know, probably if you're up for a job of an Android programmer, I really would be surprised if somebody turned around and said, Okay, Angie, you used the set on click listener here. Why didn't you use the on click event? I'd be really surprised. I'd be, if it works, I don't think they're even going to look and see how you did it. And if it doesn't work, then they might start picking it apart. All right. So as it says, you can use the event listener for other events. So you can listen for all sorts of things. Now notice on click with the view. So if you wanted to make your application touch screen compatible, where you could click on a certain part of the screen to make something happen, you could use this. All right. Not only is there an on-click listener, there's an on-long-click listener. You probably have seen this before. I know on my phone, it's an older phone because I'm too cheap to go out and buy another one. But if I want to do like copy and paste from a text or something, I've got to do a long click. And that's the only way that it'll bring up, copy stuff to the clipboard and paste stuff from the clipboard is if I use that. On touch, as it says, handles any form of touch contact, including individual or multiple touches and gesture motions. So if you were creating a game, you might want to give the user multiple ways of playing it. All right. I mean, to some people, playing a game on your phone and having to press buttons is like a joke. But if you can set it up so they can turn the phone or do whatever to make it do what you want it to do, chances are more people are going to like it. The unfocused change listener, I've already told you about. As it says, it handles when the focus moves away from the current view as a result of an interaction with something, some kind of a device. And on key, as it says, handles when a key on a hardware device is pressed while the view has focus. This, to me, is not as important now in here because, for example, like what I'm going to start showing the class, and I don't even know if we ever went over it, but you can check in C# there. Remember, if you remember when I clicked on that lightning bolt in the properties window and they showed all of the different methods that you could add for something. What we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to find the text changed event. What we've been doing so far, and they've been doing a pretty good job of it, is when somebody puts in something non-numeric or whatever, we're doing try catches, we're doing looping to make sure that, but what we're going to do is we're going to set it up in the text changed event. So if you put in something that's not a number, it's not going to accept it. All right. And this would be the equivalent of that. You could do something like that. So if you wanted your input to be just, in a certain way. All right. So Android, as it says, offers ready-made input controls to select one or more choices. You both know the difference between a checkbox and a radio button. I'm not going to go over those. This is written for people who don't necessarily know those differences. All right. There's a toggle button. And, I guess with most of the stuff that you and I would probably do, we wouldn't use one of these. This may make a lot more sense if you were programming something for an operating system or whatever, and you wanted to be able to set switches on and off. All right. I am going to ask that you put one of these on the assignment, but other than turning it on or off, it's not really going to do anything. All right. And the spinner that we talked about, typically for drop-down lists. And notice it says it's useful for 3 or more choices and takes up little room on the layout. So checkboxes are first. Remember, with a checkbox, you can choose none of them, one of them, all the way up to all of them. All right. So they are what are referred to as being for non-mutually exclusive choices. Make sense? All right. So to set it up, notice what we have in here. It says each checkbox is a separate instance of the checkbox class. The easiest way to do this is, for example, to do this one, get it to work, so all you have is this. Then just copy it down as many times as you need, because the only thing you're going to have to change is the ID and the associated string. That's the way that I do it. All right. So in other words, when you are working on your next assignment, I've shown you this already, but you will be doing this. So the checkboxes, and don't worry about that, I fixed that, but on here, these checkboxes, what? I created the one for morning and I copied it to afternoon and evening. All right. As it says here, typically programs receive the state of checkboxes when a user touches a submit or a done button. All right, and that's what we're going to have. It's going to be an image button, but that'll be our done button. Okay. It uses, to call something like on submit. Yeah, that's all fine. All right. This is how you can check to see which thing was checked. It's not that different from the way that it's done with HTML. There is a checked attribute. All right. I have to check on this, no pun intended, to see if you still have to cast like that. All right. So I try it without the cast and see if it works. My guess is you probably this should be fairly up to date. So I think it is still set up like this. So they give an example in here. I'm on 131. The following code snippet shows how the onSubmit method might check to see which checkbox is selected. So in other words, again, I will expect on yours for the shift, you will, technically you really should only choose one of them, but isn't it possible? Yeah, I'd work mornings. Yeah, I'd work afternoons, but I don't want to work evenings type of thing. Or I don't care. I just want a job. All right. But I want it set up. One of the tests that I'll run on yours is I will run this and I will check all three. And then down here, it should show me all three. Does that make sense? And on here, we'll get the radio buttons in a minute. Okay. I think they talk in here about how to set a default one. You know, with a default radio button, once the default is set, one must always be set. All right. But if you don't set one by default, that's okay. But I will run it without any of them being set. And I want you to come up with a message, then a toast or something that says you must enter a gender. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, you can always go back and check this under the Android developer documentation. So radio buttons are mutually exclusive. You already know this. Okay. Now, it says each radio button is an instance of a radio button class. But since they're bound together. Does that make sense? Where they're not really bound together for checkboxes. Radio buttons are bound together. So I want you to put your radio buttons into a radio group. All right? So if you notice, we got a radio group, and then inside are the radio buttons. Again, I would recommend creating one, getting it to look the way you want it to look, and then just copying it down, changing the ID, changing, etc. All right. As it says here, the click event must be public. Yeah, return void. Yeah, all that good stuff. But if you look in here, what does this say? All right. In other words, I'll want you to check on gender, which I think was male, female, and prefer not to answer or something like that. There you go. Okay. So I want you to check. If there's nothing in there, have a toast. If it's female, then it should say female. If it's male, it should say male, and if it's etc. And if you want to set one of them as a default, go ahead and do that. If you don't want to, that's fine too. All right. Okay. Next are toggle buttons and switches. As it says, a toggle input control lets the user change a setting between two different states. On state, off state. All right. On, off. It's not necessarily going to turn red. All right, but there should be some designation, as it says there, that, well, actually, that's a toggle button, and these are switches. With switches, and that's what you're going to use. All right? Okay. So they show you how to set everything up in here. So for the first part of this assignment, you're not even going to have a second screen or second activity. You're just going to make that form. And if you don't like the way I set it up whatever way you want. The only thing to worry about, so to speak, you've already seen this kind of stuff before, is when you do this, let me make that smaller so you can see all of it. When you have this whole thing on the screen, you can't see all of it at once if the Android keyboard comes up. You know what I'm saying? And you might want to take yours and make it look nicer than mine. Maybe you want to push this up more, etc. You don't need a heading here. If you want to put a heading there, you can. You don't have to. If you want these to be closer together and move this all up quite a bit, you can do that too. I don't care. I'm just more concerned with that I know you've already worked with edit text, but that you work with a spinner, you work with radio buttons in a radio button group, you work with checkboxes, you work with a toggle, and you work with an image button. That's the gist behind that part of the assignment. All right, so they go through and they tell you about turning it on and off. Okay. All right, so let's take a minute or two to talk about this one. These are the spinners. All right, as it says, it provides a quick way to select one value from a set. All right, and let's see. I couldn't even find at home. I've moved a bunch of stuff from this machine onto my external flash drive. So I found, I think this is Luke's from last semester. So I'm going to get rid of this. All right, and where is it? See, so it says Gosnell. I'm not claiming that's mine. It's not. In fact, I looked at it, and his is written fine, but I didn't write mine like his. But this is his right here. So again, I put in 300 and, whoops, okay, come on. All right. So I come in here and I put in 345. All right, and down here I want to put in 212. Now if I click here, is that pretty obvious what that's doing? And if I click the multiply and then say calculate, it puts the answer down there. Does all that make sense? That's what I'm going to expect us to be able to do. Clears everything, puts the focus back there, like you'd imagine. But these are handled a little bit differently. So I'm going to go back to this because we might come back to here a bit. We'll see. All right. If you've got a long list of choices, it says the spinner may extend beyond your layout, forcing the user to scroll it. One thing to think about with that, I mean, if you're thinking, for example, with yours, Angie, that the majority of people who use this will be using their phone, you might not want to have 27 different possibilities there. It's just that it's too hard for people to do that through their phone. It's hard enough to do it from a tablet. All right. Okay, so to create a spinner rather, you use the spinner class. All right, so notice, create a spinner element and specify its values using an array and array adapter. All right. Mr. Corrigan told me that he got a thing from whatever company he ordered it from, but remember how I can't use this machine in there because it doesn't have a connection? That's an adapter, isn't it? He's got an adapter, so I'm going to be able to plug something into the adapter that goes into that machine or into the projector, and it's going to plug into the adapter that'll plug into my machine. All right. So again, that's typically how you use an adapter. So what you do is you use an array adapter. What the array adapter is, for lack of better words, going to be is it's going to be a list of everything you want in the drop-down. So for instance, if you wanted a drop-down and you wanted that drop-down to have all 50 states in it, you would have 50 things in there. Make sense? All right. So you create the spinner element, you create the spinner and its adapter using the spinner adapter class. And as it says, to define the selection callback, or in other words, what do you want it to do? You implement the on item selected listener interface. So again, for a calculator, if we click the plus button, we're going to want to call a plus, an add routine, etc. All right. So creating it isn't hard. You just drag it out there. It is one of the things that's out there. So if I come over here, all right, and I come back over to here, let's jump back here and here and here and there. Okay. So when I go there and I start looking at things that are available, I'll go into design mode here. If I come up here and bring up my search and I type in spinner, there it is. Okay, I mean, that's what you do to add one. Take it, you drag it down in there. That's basically it as far as what has to be done. All right. You add an adapter that fills the spinner list with values. I'm not going to read the rest of it because I already gave you my own definition of that. Okay. All right. So as it says, it takes the data you've specified and it makes a view for each item that's in there. So for instance, I am asking that you make a spinner in yours, and it's going to have the 50 states in it. Now, don't worry about, you just go out to the internet because you can find a list of all 50 states. Don't type them in. That'd be a waste of your time. All right. So as it says, the spinner adapter class allows you to define two different views, one that shows the data values in the spinner itself, and one that shows the data in a drop-down list when the spinner is touched or clicked. So you already saw that in here, that this looks different now. So right now it's got just the last one I chose, or whatever you set for a default. And this, when you click on it, it shows all of them. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So here's the example that they have. So would be for hobbies or something. I don't know what. Okay. Says you can use a cursor adapter, but that's if you're working getting stuff from a database. So you right now don't even worry about that. Okay. All right. So creating the spinner and its adapter, as it says here, create the spinner and set its listener to the activity that implements the callback methods. Probably when you get to this part of the homework problem, I would recommend having this open and look at this section rather. It's only about 10 pages or so. It's not super long. All right. So it says the best place to do this is when the view is created. Put it non-create. All right. That should make sense. So it says follow these steps at the, and it says refer to the full onCreate method at the end of the steps. Fine. Add the code below to the onCreate method. So there it is. So this should look familiar by now. Remember, I don't think you have to do this. I don't think you'll have to. You try it. If it gives you an error message, that was the old way of doing things where you had to always cast it, but I don't think you have to cast even with a spinner anymore. So that's creating the spinner. It's going to be in your XML file that you're going to put in the possible values that are in there, not in here. All right. So add the code as it says, gets the spinner object. Yeah, we've done all that. Okay, set the on item selected. So again, what do you want it to do when it clicks a certain item? All right. So if it's not null, what does that mean? That means you chose something, right? Doesn't that make sense? All right. Sometimes you'll have that, and in here you can do this if you want to. On yours, you can either set your state, you can default it to Missouri. You can set it, or if you want to, because a lot of them do it this way, they say select a state, and that way you force the person to put in a state, because you can check, and if it says select a state, you don't allow it to go any further. You give them a toast or whatever. You say you must select a state. That's a cleaner way of doing it. It's a little more code, but it's a cleaner, better way of doing it. All right. Also, it says in the onCreate method, add a statement that creates the array adapter. All right. So that's in here. This is pretty damn ugly. Array adapter char sequence adapter equals array adapter dot create from resource. This is that labels array. So this would be your states right here. And that's your spinner item. So they do explain everything that's going on in here. But again, the syntax for this is a little hinky. It's different because we haven't looked at this kind of a control before. All right. Okay. Specify the layout the adapter should use to display the list of spinner choices. Well, that's what we've got down here. It's almost always it's going to be this. It's a drop down. That's almost always what you're going to use. All right. I've never used any other kind, to be honest with you. All right. Then use set adapter to apply the adapter to the spinner. That's actually making the connection between the adapter and the spinner. So what you're doing is you're using the XML file to create a character array that's got your choices. You're using the adapter so that your character array is able to talk to your program. And that once you make a choice, you can do what you want to do with that choice. So as it says here, they give you the full code. Yours is going to be very similar to this. In fact, you probably could use this almost verbatim. The only thing you're going to have to do is in here where they did this, yours is going to be a thing that's got all 50 states in it. All right. All right. Implementing the on item selected listener, as it says right there, to define the selection callback. So in other words, what do you want to have happen? That's the callback when you choose something. All right. So as it says, Android Studio automatically imports the adapter view widget. This is you start reading through this, it's not going to make sense until you're doing it. It really isn't. And I don't want to sit and read stuff to you or keep reading stuff to you. But notice, when you choose an item, here's what happens and how the item is retrieved. You can read that yourselves. But again, the adapter is making it possible that once you select an item, it says, okay, go out to that list of items that you have in that array that you set up in the XML, grab the one that I want, bring it into my program, let me refer to it in my program, and let me be able to use it programmatically. Okay? All right. If you need, it says retrieve the selected item using the get item at position. So what is that? That's basically the array element. Does that make sense? All right. And they show you in here, they show you, again, you can use, I think I used almost exactly this code. The question mark in here, I believe, means that it can be null. Usually that is, that allows for nulls. The program doesn't break if it's null. Okay. All right. Implement or override the on nothing selected. Well, if you do set it up so that you've got an item that appears when you start to run the program, let's see what he did. I don't really remember. So I'm going to bring this in here. I'm going to stop it and start it again. So notice he's just got the first one. I think that does show by default. All right, whatever one is first. But I believe you can also change it if you want to. Okay, and this is what we're going to have. Basically, it'll be set up. It'll look virtually just like this. All right, I'll tell you what. It's been about an hour. It's 1:06. Let's take till like 1:16. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll pick it up at that time.